Hello and welcome. So I've feeling the need to do more commentary on kind of current events and relating it to the stuff I'm interested in. I'm a big believer that the political and the cultural are kind of one and the same. They massively influence each other. So basically, there's no escaping politics. There's no escaping the culture and the influence and how those interweave. Yeah, there's just no escaping any of that stuff that we all exist within. So anyway, if you follow the news at all, as I do, you've probably heard about the LA protests that are occurring. And I wanted to give an update on that and also like try to do some commentary that I haven't heard in connection to this and like why it's happening, why it matters, and kind of what this could mean for the near future and even potentially long term future. Because these protests are not. I don't. They're not happening in a vacuum. They're happening for many reasons. And President Trump has been doubling down on immigration raids, and ICE is executing these orders. They've been entering homes without consent. They've expedited the removal process for the people they've rounded up, and they've been violating constitutional rights. So with reckless abandon, honestly. There's really no other way to spin this. LA is supposed to be a sanctuary city. So California as a state has a favorable opinion of immigrants as a whole. And also, mind you, so does the whole country, no matter what the election results say. So when ICE unlawfully comes in, they see this as an attack on their neighbors, their fellow citizens, their community, people that they see as members of their community. And Trump pushing ICE to move into California is a political play. This is obvious, I think.
What changed now? Why is this situation different to not consult with Governor Newsom about this?
Well, the biggest change from that statement is we have an incompetent governor. So I talked about governors, but I didn't talk about he's an incompetent governor. Look at the job he's doing in California. He's destroying one of our great states. And if I didn't get involved, if we didn't bring the Guard in, and we would bring more in if we needed it, because we have to make sure there's going to be law and order. You had a disaster happening.
Think. So to move on LA, especially, he knew what would happen. This is a provocation. This is a calculated one. And as expected, in response to ICE, protests have erupted. And I think this is what was expected. In response to these protests, I think Trump has ordered an aggressive federal crackdown, sending in an additional 2,000 National Guard troops on top of the 2,000 that were already mobilized, and another 700 Marines on top of that, which I didn't like look up the historical precedence of that particular detail of the Marines, because the National Guard being used for protests is a very rare occurrence as well. They're not really equipped to do that or trained to do that. But also the use of Marines, I need to like check into that because I don't ever remember reading that Marines have been used for something like this. But yeah, historically the National Guard is brought in from the ground up. So what I mean by that is so like the city determines if they need help or like the state determines if the governor needs help. Some basic checks and balances that are fundamental to being American and being in favor of checks on power. And Trump has gone around that yet again, doing something unprecedented, expanding the executive branch yet again at an unprecedented level. And honestly, we haven't seen this level of expansion in this way since like FDR. And FDR was definitely using that power for, I would say, more beneficial purposes. But anyway, sending in the National Guard when they're not welcome, the president is imposing his will. The National Guard is typically not even used for protests, as I was saying, especially in a city like LA that does not want them, doesn't really need them. The LAPD is such a massive police force. So you're bringing the military into a place that has people who do not understand the basic nuances that are happening on the ground in those locations. And one of the most obvious things is I think Trump is doing this as a distraction. from his horrendous tax bill is on one hand. California Governor Gavin Newsom even criticized this deployment as unnecessary and saying it will inflame tensions. And this is part of the reason I want to commentate on it. I think he wants to inflame tensions. Maybe that's obvious to people, but he also to create further discontent, further distraction, and to attempt to create a further false narrative around this idea of radical leftists in America and going to the what is seen as the heartland of that in California. You know, I'm sure leftists would debate that. I don't really know. It's not the purpose of this video, but and podcast, but just more distractions is the point. More distractions from the reality that he isn't draining the swamp, for example. Once again, another presidency not draining the swamp. Like, how can you drain the swamp when you continue to provide tax cuts to the ultra wealthy? You know, make that make sense. Make that make sense in my brain. Anyway, news on this. Like, I guess California has also sued. You know, that might be a somewhat performative to kind of save face. It's the American way to sue. But when does this actually do anything? I don't know. But I suppose, like, in a way, it's at least provide another indicator that California does not want this. It's an indicator of that. And the people of California, or at least the majority, do not want this either. And I'm certain the people of LA do not want the National Guard in their city. I mean, for fuck's sake, like you have Trump intensifying this kind of rhetoric, further, you know, suggesting that California officials are obstructing immigration enforcement, and has even floated the idea of arresting their fucking governor. Trump has. He has referred to protesters as insurrectionists. And then on the ground, protests continue. Many American people have expressed they do not support this. LA does not support this. You have David Herrera, a union leader, detained by federal agents. There's a video of the Los Angeles Police Department, who is not innocent in this and how they're handling this, using less lethal weapons on protest crowds, which are, you know, they're rubber bullets. And you can even see them shoot at an Australian TV reporter, hitting her in the leg.
After hours of standing off, this situation has now rapidly deteriorated. The LAPD moving in on horseback, firing rubber bullets at protesters, moving them on through the heart of LA. You just shut the
So this is the update. What does this mean? Why does it matter? At a deeper level, I think this is about maintaining a narrative, one that can operate as a distraction for many American people. This is what the age of everyone constantly being connected to some form of screen provides. It provides a tool set to maintain this narrative and fantasy that you're trying to build. So what do the ICE raiders operate as in this narrative? I think they are kind of part of the staged fantasy of like this purification, the purification of the image. And they provide form to the reactionary desire for wholeness in that narrative. And I'll try to make that make sense. Like wholeness in that narrative through the removal of the other and what is like framed as the symbolic other, in this case, immigrants. And potentially, is the reason I'm kind of bringing this up, potentially this idea of a type of leftist that is also now being deemed as an other, something that needs to be gotten rid of, you know? And the other in this case, as historically has often been, is still immigrants still. Like that is the fundamental one, that are seen as the other. Ones that are seen as something outside of what it is to be American. And that's kind of where the leftist point connects. Now I ask, like an American, if you go and ask an American what it is to be an American, and you will get 100 different answers, right? But the spectacle, I think, is the point. The deportation spectacle, we can call it. So Americans that wish to be distracted from who is really fucking them every which way, can be distracted by the pleasure of domination that is being enforced upon another. The thrill of watching someone else be punished to reaffirm your own identity. And this is why Trump's deployment of the National Guard is the reassertion of this fantasy that's trying to be built, this narrative that's trying to be maintained. It says we are in control. No need to worry, you know. Do not forget that I told you we are under siege, right? And we must crush the threat, like that type of thing. But what if the siege itself is manufactured? What if immigration is not the thing causing economic uncertainty? I promise you it is not, but it becomes the distractive narrative. So you blame something other than the status quo that has those in power getting richer and the poor getting poorer, the dollar becoming weaker. It can be a narrative that allows someone else to be blamed from all of your discontent. No. You know, no need to continue looking at the tax cuts to the wealthiest elites. You know, look at something else. Look at something else, right? But finally, they'll be able to tell you, you know, oh, like once we solve this problem, finally that trickle down economic system will come to you at some point. It's not at all right now. Not right now, but that's because we have this other thing to fix. Historically, we try to do the same distractions over and over again, but this time you just got to wait a little longer, and then finally it's going to trickle down into you, right? So you can finally, you know, stop feeling like shit. That's what you got to wait for. And in the meantime, right, get mad at the immigrants for why you are struggling to pay your fucking rent, and not at the people that are actually causing that to happen on your everyday, day-to-day life, right? And from all this, I think there's something else to remember. Capitalist democracies do not rely solely on consent to be governed, obviously. They rely on some form of resignation, I think, and coercion. Coercion. I don't know why I can't say that word. Coercion. But anyway, especially when like legitimacy falters within that system, the ICE raids, the disregard for the sovereignty of states, the sovereignty of California, and the deployment of federal troops when they were not asked for, right? This is proof of this reality, proof of a weakness, not strength, right? But why? Because Trump cannot govern through persuasion. So he governs through spectacle and brute force. But I think in this case, the real target isn't just immigrants. It's California's political defiance, its refusal to play along with the fantasy and narrative of national unity under Trump's rule. So the escalation, right, allows for the furthering and building of the false narrative that, you know, for example, California is an other that must be humiliated in order to reaffirm a more real America, right? That Trump is trying to establish, right? More distraction, basically. So Trump isn't just sending ICE to enforce immigration policy. He's sending them to enforce a narrative. What California is lawless, that immigrants are threats, and that the military is the bastion of order. That's the narrative he's trying to build. It's ideological theater, ideological distraction. So what do you think should be done with a people of a state that are demanding to be heard, that are demanding to or demanding the premise of the fantasy and the narrative that Trump is trying to establish is false? Do you wish for us to be a democracy or not? And that's why this matters. I think it's a sign that many Americans are seeing that the real fight isn't about who gets to stay. It's about what kind of state we are willing to tolerate. For many, the signs of what the state is and what it wishes to be is one that will not be tolerated right now. It's not going to be tolerated. So when you see the police fire rubber bullets at journalists, and the president is threatening to arrest the governor. Do you wonder if this really, is this really who we are and who we want to be? And if we are targeting the right people to blame for the growing discontent. And I think that's my overall point. I feel like these questions are not being felt. Like this questioning and uncertainty is not being felt fully by enough Americans, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, hopefully I keep this current event thing going because I kind of like it. But peace.